Go.
Okay, so can I start?
Yes.
Okay, so it was very interesting to hear all the presentations and talks, because it largely kind of enriched our understanding about digitalization, and this kind of new terms emerged. But we from the beginning, from day one, we decided to focus on digital sovereignty. And what we decided to collectively to use as a platform would be a smart home environment. So why smart home? Because in one sense, it is a very concrete example. It's also, let's say, Helen's PhD topic, so it obviously could contribute to her let's say foresight and thinking what other options we can discuss in this digital transformation domain. But obviously you can think about that there is a lot of data you can collect when you have really a futuristic smart home, starting with a kind of smart toilet and finishing with your credit card history. Also, in smart home, it's not just a passive thing, it can also affect you by odors, by lights, by music. And what is more interesting is this intelligent or kind of intelligent agents which represents the house. So on one side we have this smart home, on the other side we kind of define now that what will happen if all this data which smart home collects is still within your reach. So it's also a part of, let's say, what you are producing. And then what happens if you think about a smart home which is collecting all this data as not just a passive collector, but some kind of an entity which is growing with you, like a digital twin, but on a level of the home. So then we have this kind of question of how you could see this entity, and whether this entity has access to all the data or not, because these intelligent assistants can be either provided by different vendors. It can be also something which you inherit from the past person who was living in the house. Could be maybe a multiple these intelligent assistants, like every user in the house can have their own. So this kind of in a way we ended up with the question of you have this kind of smart home data, but inside that you have these entities which might be taking a share of the big slice. And on the top of that, then we started to question why we actually need a smart house and what is it good for. Because okay, I understand that that many companies want to adapt the technology to us. They want to kind of observe behavior and so on. But if you really think about the individual benefits of one, then coming from our expert experience and wishes, I think that one thing which could be really interesting to observe is this, like, let's say, what will happen if the house will be nudging you towards some kind of behavioral changes. And that's how we came up with this cognitive behavioral therapy, because cognitive behavioral therapy is one of the methodologies how to kind of address mental health issues, and it really based on collecting the behavioral and cognitive patterns. And it's true that already now we have some technological advances and some programs which allow this, let's say, at least internet-based interventions. But while the houses will be more and more available, smart houses, then we can imagine then that that you can turn your smart home into a kind of a hospital, or kind of a learning environment. So you have this smart assistant now. It's not just an assistant, but it can be like your coach, which kind of since she or he kind of knows your patterns, and then can use the factors of the house to kind of to nudge you. So that's more or less is the scenario we came up with, and it's in a way could be seen as a research project. And now I give the floor to what we had a number of questions. If we have this scenario, so what are the kind of consequences in different domains?
Yes, so first we had a brief look at existing literature regarding smart homes, IoT technologies, and cognitive behavior therapy, and it turns out that there isn't much yet. So this is a huge research opportunity. But there are some research on smart and IoT technologies in use in healthcare in general, and also some in use for treating specific diagnoses, such as depression. And also there is a body of literature about assisted living and welfare technologies that we could draw upon to kind of figure out the possibilities and limitations for this scenario. So the research we have looked at focuses a lot on the monitoring and analysis and analyzing and sharing real-time data on health parameters and behavior. And the data sharing is for practitioners and communication with practitioners, and not necessarily with other people. But I'm also guessing a lot of it goes to producers of these or manufacturers of these devices. But this will enable practitioners to act and respond quickly and according to needs. And also the societal benefits that are highlighted in this literature are lower costs and increased efficiency. For instance, they can reduce strain in hospitals as people can be treated more at home, assisted by smart and IoT devices. It also promotes a personalized healthcare as the devices can be programmed to cater to the individual needs. And also, they claim that it can promote autonomy and independence of the patient. For instance, by allowing them to live at home longer with the assistance of technology, rather than be moved to a care institution. Most of the literature that we looked at mentioned privacy and security and ethical challenges, but they do not really go into detail of what these challenges are. And oh, not yet, Alexander. Thank you. So just to sum it up a bit, it's little research on mental health issues with these technologies, and it's a kind of limited scope of technologies in use. It's mostly about the monitoring and surveillance of patients and measuring, and not so much about the everyday objects that we think can be used too. And then it's the limited detail on the challenges. Yes, so it's a huge research opportunity. So now we can go, yes. So the benefits of CBT and the smart house, it can contribute to improve health overall, including mental health. It can provide personalized and diverse healthcare with many various approaches. In our group, we have, for instance, been discussing that the smart home and the intelligent assistant can encourage healthy eating through nudging and mechanisms that restrict access to unhealthy or maybe triggering food, and nudging to remind householders to drink water. It can also register and analyze sensory input such as pulse, emotions, moods, maybe even sweat and odors, and behavioral patterns to detect changes in conditions and act upon them. It can use lights and temperature and entertainment systems as part of the treatment, for instance, to calm a person down during an anxiety attack. And it can have mechanisms for providing the right amount of the right medicine and to remind the patient to take the medicine through different sorts of notifications, and can also call for help when it's necessary. And moreover, it can save money and encourage a more sustainable way of living through reduced or more accurate energy consumption. It can improve education and information literacy. For instance, you could program the smart system to provide various perspectives and sources for information, and in that way kind of limiting the echo chamber effect. And you can increase security through surveillance and police alerts. And you could also monitor risk behavior such as violence and abuse and self-harm, and again call for help when this is needed. That's for this slide.
Thank you, Helena. And then yeah, we talked a lot about the benefits, but we also talked a little bit about the risks associated with smart houses and intelligent assistants. And we looked a little bit into the literature, particularly around privacy. And it's surprising that there seems to be there's a big gap in terms of privacy literature on the risks associated with smart homes beyond the kind of just mentioning, oh, there are privacy risks, but not really delving deep into it. So we kind of just talked about the actual risks that could occur with these smart houses, and also with the kind of if you were to put one of these health mechanisms into place. And the first, of course, is just the massive amount of really sensitive personal data that would be collected. So you can imagine the health data that would be collected by the house, the behavioral and cognitive data, then of course just race and ethnicity. You can think about the religious beliefs. So if you practice your religion at home, your sex life, your sexual orientation would be recorded through cameras and other sensors. And then of course your political opinions could be inferred from all your media consumption that will be monitored by the house. And then the big question about that is data security and encrypting this data. And a crucial question would be, where would the data be stored? So would it be on the devices, or would it be in the cloud, or would it be stored by companies that would provide the kind of infrastructure for these houses? And then another risk, of course, is if companies do have access to this information, and whether or not you're going to be profiled and the data is going to be monetized. And also, of course, we kind of imagined some of the data could be, if you train the AI system, you could also sell that on if people wanted to have a certain type of personality. You could imagine that you could monetize these intelligent assistants. And then, of course, we also talked about government access to this data, because you can imagine the amount of data that the house would hold on your consumption patterns, but also on your water usage. We've seen examples throughout the world where just even water usage is monitored by tax and welfare authorities to see whether or not the amount of occupants in a house is consistent with what they tell the tax authorities. So there would be just a vast amount of information that the government could use for various purposes. And then, of course, a major risk as well would be the cybersecurity element. So the cybersecurity literature talks about a lot of hacking of infrastructure by foreign governments. And you can imagine if there are a lot of smart homes that are connected, we're talking about thousands of homes, they would naturally become, they could be subject to cyber attacks. And also you can think of manipulative behavior where your media consumption, for instance, is manipulated to manipulate people's political opinions, as happens currently on social media. And then, of course, we talked about the ethical and the cultural risks as well around whether or not you actually want to nudge people in certain ways, if that's a good thing, if that's an ethical thing to do. And of course, the cultural questions about, what are we leaving for the next society if we build this smart home infrastructure with this amount of data that's collected? What are we telling the next generation that may not want to engage in that, or if they want to build on it, maybe there are positives. Maybe just the next slide. So all of these risks that we talked about, then what we also talked about is how to mitigate these risks. So the most obvious way would be legal frameworks. So there are three kind of actors that we would think about. The first would be the manufacturers of the smart homes and the AI assistants, and the type of obligations that they would have in terms of creating the devices and the systems and the software with data protection at the forefront of their mind. So there would need to be very good security safeguards and encryption of the data, and to prevent any sort of leakage or outside of the house. And then, of course, you would need the occupants of the house would also need to be able to control the data, delete it, and also it must be a system that's very transparent, so that they can weigh up the risks of using the smart home. And then, of course, it would need to be a legal framework for any data transfers to medical professions or professionals that were involved in the mental health programs. And then, of course, there would need to be a legal framework for government access to the data, to prevent so that people would know what kind of data that tax authorities or welfare authorities could have access to. So I think that's where we left it with the mitigating the risks.
Yes, and I think we have come up with much more questions during this group work than we have answers. And Ronan touched upon a lot of them now, but we have also phrased some additional ones. So for instance, what is the role of the practitioner in all of this? Will there be a practitioner mapping the patient's needs and challenges and assigning this assistant or a smart home system, or will this assistant be so smart and adaptive that it will be able to do all of this itself? And will the person who is treated be able to override and reprogram the system themselves? If not, then that's a lot of power and trust put into the technological devices. But if they are able to, they may cause harm to themselves if they are at any stage not agreeing with the treatment anymore, or a situation occurs. And of course, who has access to the data, and what can the data be used for other than learning and adjusting to the household? And what are the safety mechanisms in case the devices malfunctions or they lose connections to vital infrastructure such as the internet? And how can they be protected from ill-intended actors such as cyber criminality criminals? Yeah. And also more like a practical household thing, like how can this be integrated into a household with more people, where maybe only one of the people needs the therapy or is supposed to have this system catered to them? Will the others just have to live with it? And will they be able to manipulate or control the therapeutic elements? And that may open up for domestic violence if they are. And how to avoid that the other people's data is also being collected if they don't want to take part in this. Yes, do you have anything to add, Alexander or Ronan, to this?
Great.
Well, just one generic comment is that, you know, some films also recently try to kind of show that if we have now technologies which can record our behavior, you can actually learn a lot about yourself and things you do unconsciously. So you kind of, these behavioral patterns can actually surprise you. You can kind of, you have your one image of yourself, and then you have some technology which actually kind of objectively record it, and you might not like the mirror, you know. So that's an interesting thing, you know, like your system says like you haven't smiled today for the full day, and you think that you are a really cheerful person, then you have like really questions to start asking yourself.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, all three. This has been, to me, fascinating because, you know, clearly this topic of the wiring up of the home is so fascinating because the home is such an intimate space, and you know, it's a place where the convergence of all these technologies and opportunities becomes so personal, so intimate in the physical space. And they give, you know, the notion of personal data a twist and an even greater meaning. I mean, I like particularly the fact that, you know, you looked at what were the potential benefits and also some of the potential obvious risks. I think that, you know, the therapeutic part, in a way, it's one application or a much broader thing, because, you know, your smart home will probably live and serve even, you know, without the CBT application. But that's obviously one way then of leveraging that data for some particular purpose. I mean, clearly, as you were talking, I was thinking that, you know, this could be a wonderful place to live, but could also be a nightmare. You know, I had immediate, I mean, I confess, I was immediately feeling threatened by a house that would feel that they will know that I put on weight recently, and they will stop me opening the fridge. I mean, I know that that is going to happen. They're going to stop me opening, reaching out for the bottle of gin. So, you know, I could be a nightmare of a place to live. But clearly, these are all things that are happening in one form or other, and that you know, raising all these questions is exactly the way forward, because, you know, you need to raise the questions, and you need to be able to identify where would you put the boundaries. For example, you know, would you as a user be able to identify not just delete information, but decide which information is collected and which is not? You know, I would not want to have a camera in my toilet. You know, I feel that there's a limit to privacy that I'm not willing to you know, to give away. And so, you know, your control of your home would be absolutely critical. And I think that that is clearly an aspect that goes into many of those issues that you raised. Before I just ask all the others to comment, I just wanted to ask the three of you, would you be happy to live in this house?
I don't think I would like to live there, no.
Okay, no, just to be honest. Ronan, what do you think?
No, I unless there were certain limits, if you could think about the limits maybe, but I think in principle, I tend to keep virtual assistants out of our home as well. But it's creeping all the time. Like we never thought we'd carry smartphones around with us all the time and sleep next to them, but we do. So I'm just wondering in 10, 20 years whether or not we'll just be so worn down by all of these devices that it's what we'll just have to face.
Alexander, what do you think?
Well, that's why we came up with this CBT scenario, because we tried to kind of imagine when this house would make us some good. And I would personally probably kind of would like to try at least this kind of intelligent coach, which would then kind of say me things, but it's all provided by the with this notion that all this data is just inside the house. It's not kind of going out. So that's
still turn into a tormentor rather than a coach.
I would also just emphasize that I think there should be consent at the basis of this. So you're not put in this house against your will. And I also think that not all the various functions needs to be applied at once, but maybe, whatever the person needs or wants. It could just be to have some lively music whenever you feel down, and the house can detect that your mood is falling, and it doesn't have to be more than that, I think.
So it should obey the first law of robotics, not to harm the people that live in it. Okay, enough of me. Any thoughts, folks? Marina, Igor, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, my thought is that is very provocative and thoughtful, good for generating thoughts scenario, no? Because it's like self-quantification on steroids. It's like so you can see all you can have quantified together. So of course, I think one very straightforward comment is that even in the case of a person that needs this kind of home for behavioral therapy or for helping solving some issues, the discussion is always about if the advantages outweigh the risks, no? Because you have both in your analysis, and of course that could be understand better if there is some testing or some other information that we don't have now about how this actually operates. But yes, I was wondering if you had thought about this balance between, you know, risk and benefits. Just a comment.
You know, just to say a few words about it, is like it's interesting that in different countries you have a different attitude towards therapy and psychologists and psychiatrists in general. So, for example, in Russia or in kind of post-Soviet Union countries, this is really stigmatized. So at the same time, on the kind of other part of the spectrum, I think that we all sometimes need some kind of emotional coach that kind of will kind of even detect the slightest changes and kind of nudge you to eat or to kind of to rest, or because we tend to kind of to squeeze ourselves to the maximum until it's too late and it's already kind of so that's yeah. So maybe the therapy is kind of a scary word there, but things about, you know, like almost like a companion or it's almost like another protection layer.
Big blanket.
Yes.
Igor, do you have any thoughts on the matter?
Well, I have two thoughts, very practical thoughts. The first is I love the title. I think that you are the first one saying fighting for sovereignty, which is not very popular these days. Saying something like that, I think is good. So you're very straightforward.
Puoi
And the
passare un
second,
pochino allegro, non li sento.
Okay. And the second one is related to the smart homes, at least in industry, in the smart city context that I presented yesterday. Your questions, I mean, when you, Helene, mentioned that you have more questions than answers, for me, that would be a really good news, because I guess that many people in the private sector are just considering privacy in a very, let's say, limited way. So the questions that you have raised, I think that they are really crucial. And I was connecting with the lack of questioning these aspects from the private sector. So for all people working in industry at the moment in the domain of smart homes, I think that you have, in a very few days, you have produced a very interesting agenda that is crucial, because as we have said, there are many aspects that we don't know how to deal with. So I think congratulations, you have just done a really good job.
And before you react to this, can I take the opportunity now to ask Richard, as we were talking about people from the private sector not asking the right questions. I think that Richard may have something to offer, because he probably has developed one of these homes or lives in one of them.
I will, thank you, Max. I will never live in such a home. I can assure you of that. I'd like to comment first, though, by saying that I commend the team who did this, and I hope that as these types of smart homes move into reality, that you are involved in their rollout, because that means at least we will have a considered approach, which I think is significantly different from what we're seeing right now, which is the technology-led, the solutionist-led approach that is transfixed by the sex and sizzle of technology without due regard for a lot of the other characteristics. I think what's really important is that you anchored yourself on this notion of CBT, because I have been involved in smart apartment and smart building projects in Germany, where the municipality undertook to renovate a number of buildings and make them available to people of low income, and doing so decided to take advantage of domotica or smart home technologies in order to instrument the buildings and to see what they could do with them. And when you talk about some of the benefits, such as enabling longer, independent, autonomous living, and you're addressing issues of security and healthcare, you're absolutely correct. There are benefits there, and they also cause a lot of our problems. What we discovered, for example, is that as we address many of the physical healthcare and medical issues, we create new issues. So the biggest issue we had to deal with was loneliness and depression, because for many of the people who were in these homes, trips to the doctor, to the clinic, to the pharmacy, to the hospital represented 90% of their social interactions through the course of a day. So by fixing one problem and giving them the opportunity to live independently at home, we were creating a constellation of new problems. What we also discovered was that from a policy perspective, it was really important for us in the context of a German city to aggregate information that was non-personally identifiable. And that was a really key characteristic. And to give you an example, we wanted to know if somebody in an apartment had moved from a vertical orientation to a horizontal orientation on the floor without moving for 30 seconds, but we did not want to know specifically which person that was, because nobody needs to know who that person is. What we need to know is whether or not there's an event that needs intervention. But in Germany, we made some very, very explicit rules regarding the types of data that were being generated. And we also then had to understand from a security perspective how we were going to aggregate and transmit that data. Some of this was perfectly acceptable to do over Wi-Fi. Some of it we refused to allow transmission except over a fiber connection, because we had much better control over how that was being done. I think in the end, you've given a very considered approach to this, but it comes back to me as being a very simple example of what we saw in the space race when we needed a writing implement. And the Americans spent $1 million to invent a pen that worked to zero gravity, and the Russians used a pencil. What we're really talking about here is creating or adopting the second most invasive type of technology to solve a problem that maybe doesn't need to be addressed that way. The first most invasive, of course, being implantable devices. So I think you guys have done a fantastic job. I just want to share a little bit about what we saw and what we experienced when we tried to do some of this work. But, you know, I always have learned that the simplest answer is often the best answer. And this seems to be perhaps the most complex answer to a problem. Thank you, Max.
Max, you're muted.
We have, you know, some of these developments seems to be happening whether you like it or not. You know, there's, as you well know, there's a whole industry that is pushing and cramming sensors in everywhere, and I think that, you know, posing these questions was absolutely valid and enormously interesting. And I said that that raised many issues. Anybody else wants to come in? Any more comments? Chiara? Chiara, say muted.
No, she's not. But we cannot hear her.
Then maybe you need to plug.
Yes, yes. Now we can hear her. Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry. Always problems with the headphones. No. Well, thanks for the presentation. I have a question about whether you considered, of course, I'm sure you did, what to do with existing homes that needs to be readapted. And Richard, for instance, gave us an example of an attempt to do so. But one of the major problems that I see in practice, because in my family, my brother is an engineer and is very fascinating with all these kind of things and try to make his home as technological as possible, but is living in a block, in a flat, in a block. So there are some things that you can do and other that you can't, because you need to negotiate with other people living in the same building. And at the same time, the house is quite old, 50, 60 years old. And so there are some improvements that just cannot be applied to the home itself. So have you found any research, anybody think that already thought about how to adapt these technologies to existing houses?
Well, I think that one thing which was not really clear from our presentation was we started with this idea of kind of what will happen if we train this entity, this smart home, and then you can kind of sell it. So kind of sell from like from home to home, you know. And then here, yeah, like let's say like in your scenario, like, so if it's really adapted to one flat in a kind of block house, then it can be kind of, then your brother could kind of sell the same technology or the same kind of trained in a different. But otherwise, yeah, this when I understood that, like let's say software of the smart house and then the assistant could be from different vendors, and how this kind of therapeutic assistant would be kind of trying to imagining the graphs and the layers of data which they have to kind of decide. It's almost like this text with the small characters which nobody want to read at the end, so you have to kind of tick which boxes and which. So it might be that you need an additional artificial intelligence to translate this from one house to another or from one user to another. So yet another kind of layer.
I think Helena had an example of where a house was transferred, but the password was missing to use the smart software.
Yeah, I can. Yeah, I'm sorry if there's talking in my background. I hope you hear me. I was talking to a smart home sales company, and they told us that they had experienced once when people who had like a whole fully integrated smart home system wanted to move houses, and they sold their house, and the new people who moved in didn't have the password for the smart home system. And the manufacturers couldn't provide them with the password either. They had to like reset the whole thing. And that apparently was a big process to do when they were trying to just move in and get their new life started.
But just two comments, Chiara. I mean, I think that, you know, there's plenty of literature on the refurbishment of existing houses and apartments for energy purpose, energy efficiency improvements. And within that context, you already know that, you know, they start also putting some of the thermostats that are sort of more electronically controlled. They start putting some elements of an infrastructure. So, you know, there's obviously that literature there to piggyback in terms of doing. And in terms of selling, what Alexander was saying, selling some of the products generated by the house. I mean, certainly a lot of the information that you collect is very, retailable. For example, your energy consumption related to your house, you know, your lifestyle. And we came across, Marina, wasn't that true? We came across a Dutch cooperative, is that right, of consumers. A number of consumers in a neighborhood, they got together to share information about their different energy providers, how much they paid, etc., etc. And in a way, as a collective, they started becoming a much greater bargaining power versus the providers. And you can think that mobile phones would be the other obvious one to go and say, hang on a minute, but you know, these other providers just only charge. So, you know, the information that actually you create, you produce, could become a very valuable commodity. And you could imagine you could have yearly auctions of different providers to come and make you an offer for the services and the data. So, you know, it could be the other way around. You know, you could become, you know, sort of owner and manager of your information in ways that at the moment are just the other way around. You're just giving everything away and then have desperately try to reclaim it, right? So I think that there are some notions there that could be really be exploited in some imaginative ways. Stephen, I can see you smiling. So do you want to come in and comment on any of this?
Well, no, I was smiling because of what you told me, and it certainly is happening in the Netherlands. My son, for one, is very involved in these kind of negotiations. No, I simply I love the discussion. I don't have anything to add really. But it's great that this discussion also comes on the table like it does, and it's a very important one, I think, in the next coming years. So it's an urgent question as well.
Okay, well, are there any more comments on this subject, or shall we try to wrap up the whole experience? Not seeing anything more. Maybe what I will ask you is, if you can, to turn your cameras on so that we can take a picture of the 16er here. So, right, still Natalia.
Will we stop recording?
Yes, I think maybe yes. Stop.
Yeah.